All right, second attempt to record this. It is November 30th, 2022, 9:19 a.m., teaching at Teres Nava. And today we're going to discuss know what you know. Also, although I'm not going to write it, equally important is to know what you don't know. Now, one of the first things that we said, in fact, probably the first thing that we ever said, the first class we ever had, I discussed the idea that you have to have intellectual humility. You have to be somebody who's asking questions, being open to the possibility that you're wrong, searching, being a truth seeker, lots of different ways of saying the same thing. Okay, well, let's try to actually, find out, but how do I know anything? When somebody says, I know something is true, so I've already taught you in the past that if you really want to be a jerk to somebody, you could ask them, well, how do you know? So we're going to do that to ourselves right now, but not in a way of trying to cause ourselves pain, but to have actual confidence in what we know. How do I know stuff? How do I know anything? Why am I certain about that? Why don't I just walk through life in a haze of complete uncertainty and anxiety? You might already do that. So we're going to try to fix that problem to the best of our ability. Now, why do we care about this to begin with? And then we'll get into it. Because, at least from a Jewish perspective, Judaism is entirely based upon the idea of how do you know anything. Right? If you go into I've seen this in a number of different shuls. You go into a shul, and it says by the bima or on top of the aron, it says, Da lifnei miyat talmid. Know before whom you stand. We say, and aleinu, every day. You daven, you say aleinu, right? V'yahadata hayom, you shall know today. V'hashevo salavavecha, and then return it to your heart. Knowledge, 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 again, again, and again. The Rambam, in the very beginning of Mishnah Torah, the first thing he says, right? He says, Yisod Yisodos Avmud HaChochmos. He said, it is the foundation of all foundations and the pillar of all Chachmos, pillar of all knowledge, is what? Leida sheish matzir rishon. To know that there's a first cause. There's what we call Hashem. In philosophical terms, first cause. To know. The idea of faith, belief, guessing, etc., really doesn't have any place as a fundamental principle in Judaism. There is a concept called emunah. We have to properly understand where that fits in. Number one is yediyah. What do you know? Is absolutely central and paramount, not only to Judaism, but to life in general. Whether it's, getting into an argument with your uncle over politics at the Shabbos table, don't do that. But if you do, how do you know? How do you know you're right? Just because the people around you speak that way, or you learned it. Sorry?
You did research.
Oh, so what does research mean? You're correct. That is the proper approach. We're going to break that down. Yeah.
Either from the Torah, or because you just, or like for example, you know that I am since you're living.
So both of those are problematic, right? Because it's from the Torah. Yeah, but how do you know Torah is true? So all you're doing is pushing the step back.
That's what you're gonna prove to us. So
well, it's good. I'm happy you have that much confidence in me and trust in me. And so, number one, you have to ask the question about everything you know, including how do you know Torah is true. And the second point that you made, which was, what was the second point you made?
I am.
The idea, it comes the famous French philosopher René Descartes, who said, I think, therefore I am. It's like everyone knows they exist because we're thinking. That's also problematic, because that's not something you can prove to someone else. Like, how do you know that there's really anyone out there other than your own perception? There's a very famous, this is not the point I wanted to get to, but since it came up, well, social media is just one example of maybe it's all bots, right? Didn't Elon Musk just prove that half of Twitter was bots or something? Oh, this is really long. Hold on. Alright. I know there's is it fitting in? Oh, what's this?
There's another board over there.
Screw. Okay. Hold on. Maybe I should leave it like that. Okay, that's good enough. Okay. Right. How do you know? So there was a very famous, one of the founders of computer science back in World War II. He's a British code breaker. And he helped to found the whole concept of how computers work. There's something floating in my water that's totally gross. Okay. And his name is Alan Turing. And he came up with a concept that was called the Turing test. The Turing test is you're sitting in front of a box, screen and a keyboard. Now, it might be a computer talking to you, or it might be a person on the other side of the wall that's typing. You don't know. So how do you test it? So you ask questions, and you're typing, and you're having a conversation with this being. If, this is his test, if you cannot tell the difference, like, I think it's a person, and then you discover it's actually a computer, that's how he defines artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence is a computer program sophisticated enough to trick you into thinking that it's a real person. Now, this is a profound philosophical discussion. I could spend hours just talking about this. Because at the end of the day, that's just how I talk to you. How do you know that I'm an actual personality and not an artificial intelligence that's remote controlling me from miles away, some Russian superbot? You don't ever know with 100% certainty. Oh, it sounds like a stupid science fiction movie. Yeah, it might. But that's how you really know how anybody's a person. Because you talk to them, and it seems like you're talking to a person. That's the best you can ever have, using your logical, rational faculty. Now, the idea that I think, therefore I am, is opening up this whole idea of knowing things without being able to prove them.
Blind faith.
Not exactly the same as blind faith. Blind faith is different. I'll differentiate between them in a moment. There are things that you know, like, for example, I know I exist. Okay? Can I prove to you that I exist? No. But I know. So that's a different type of knowledge. I'm differentiating between two very broad types of knowledge. Okay, now we're getting to the subject of the class. The first type of knowledge I'm going to call internal knowledge, and the other one is called external knowledge. Now, internal knowledge is things, right, I know because I know. But I have no way to prove to anyone else, because it's all in me. Right? I know certain things. Some people have this sense about the existence of Hashem. I know Hashem exists. Great. Is that legitimate? Yes. It is perfectly legitimate. However, the problem with it is that you can't externalize it. I could tell you I feel Hashem in my heart. I know He exists. I know I exist. I know love is good. I know good is better than evil. There's a lot of things you can know. But how do I transfer that knowledge from my internal subjective experience to yours? I can't. I have no way of transferring it. You might trust me. You might say, Rabbi, I know you for a while now. You seem like a good person. You seem like somebody that has no ulterior motive. There's nothing you want from me. There's nothing you're trying to trick me. And so if you're telling me that you experience this, I trust your experience. That's a thing, and that could happen. But other than that, like, what if you don't know me? What if you don't trust me? What if you have no reason to trust me yet? So I try to share with you knowledge. That internal knowledge is not useful to share. Because it's either I believe it for myself, and if you trust me, you might trust me, but there's no way to transfer it. So we're going to have to spend all of our time today, certainly, and mostly in life, dealing with external knowledge. Now, external knowledge, you used the word earlier, research. Research what? How do I know anything is true? Again, leaving aside the things I know just because I know them in my heart, my soul, my kidneys, whatever. Leaving all that alone, it's all great, it's all amazing, we're not talking about it anymore, we're done with that part, now we're focusing on external knowledge. How do you know anything? Yeah.
It's like I don't have knowledge from Hashem.
So again, if you're a Navi, if you're a prophet, and Hashem has directly spoken to you, that's awesome. But how can you prove to me that you're a prophet? There is a way from Torah, but that's another class. Right? There is a legitimate way to prove this. By the way, why do you need a way to prove that someone's a Navi? Because maybe they're just crazy. Maybe they need a soft white coat in a special room. You don't know. Maybe they're crazy. Or maybe they're trying to trick you. Right? There's a lot of con artists out there. Right? So, leaving aside revelation from the Almighty for a moment, how do you know anything that's true? How do you know that something is real? How do you know something is true?
I mean, you have a heart because someone cut up in a person and they're like, hey.
Good. So what is that an example of? When you see it, good. That's another example. Those are both fantastic examples. We could do 1,000 of them. The examples of what? There's one word in particular that's really super useful here. That's the one. That's the word. That's the most important word of the whole day. Evidence. Because evidence, we'll have to understand even what that word means, right? We're defining our words. We're trying to play the game that we already set out a while ago to carefully be precise in our language. But ultimately, all external knowledge comes from evidence. Now, it could be evidence from your senses. You saw it. Seeing is believing. Is that 100% proof? Have you ever seen something you found out you were wrong? Right? Nothing's 100%. But it's pretty good. It could be research. Somebody else showed it to me, etc., etc. All evidence. Now, what is evidence? Let's define that word. It's very interesting. What evidence actually is. Right? So let's use I'm going to use a silly example to illustrate the point. And then we're going to start applying it to real serious things in life. Okay? I want you to imagine that you wake up in the morning and, you look out your window and this is what you see. You see your car is wet. Okay? That's what you see. Now, immediately pops into your mind, what are the, yes?
It rained last night.
Good. So let's bring this up, okay? Your car is wet. Car is wet.
Those are inferences.
Very interesting word. We're going to come back to the word inference probably more than once. So one possibility, okay? One possibility, rained last night. Are there any other possibilities of how my car got wet?
Someone sprayed it.
Okay, let's say someone sprayed my car.
Or do.
Okay, I'll put that also. Someone sprayed my car. It might be there's a lot of dew. Right? My car's wet because of dew.
More.
Right? We could do maybe one more.
Sprinkler.
Sprinkler? Okay. Let's do sprinkler. Good. I think that's enough to illustrate our point. Okay. So now, so these are different possibilities. Another way of saying that is these are different theories. Okay? These are different theories. Another way of saying that is these are different stories or narratives. Narrative is just a fancy literary way of saying a story. It's a story, it's a narrative, or it's a theory, or it's a possibility. All of those are very useful ways of looking at this. How would I be able to differentiate which one is the best story? I'm going to look for, what was that word?
Evidence.
Look for evidence. So you look out of your window, and the first thing you notice is no clouds. Now, is it possible that it rained last night but there's no clouds?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, it's possible. But it's still suggestive. It's a piece of evidence. Okay. Second thing you notice, that you look left and you look right, no other cars on the street are wet. Which of these theories and stories seem to now be problematic?
The first one. And
It rained last night?
the third one.
And the third, right? That because you would expect, it would be reasonable that if it rains or if it was dew, that many cars in the street got wet. Okay, now you might already have enough. That already might be enough for you to say the most reasonable answer is not rain, it's not dew, it's maybe my sprinkler on my lawn, or somebody came and sprayed my car.
And you look for
Okay.
sprinkler. And if there's no sprinkler, then you know it's somebody sprayed it.
Right, so now you look further, you're looking for more.
Evidence.
Come on, let's all say it.
Evidence.
There you go. And what do you notice? You put on your glasses and you're like, what's going on out there? Because you're fascinated by this and you're like, oh my God, wet cars is like the most fascinating thing. And then you look and you notice that there's a chair, a little stool sitting by your car, and there's a bucket with soapy water and a wet sponge right next to it. What does that suggest to you?
Someone was washing it.
Someone washed your car. Now, are you confident in this conclusion at this point?
So long as you don't see a sprinkler.
Even if you did see a sprinkler.
But there's no
You-
soap in the guy's car.
Okay. It's wet.
Okay.
It's wet. It's fine. Okay. You can say, well, why would anybody wash my car? I'm like, okay, but fine. But it looks like somebody washed my car.
Detectives here.
Oh, that's actually exactly correct. I need to be detectives.
Right, so if there's no soap in my car, but there's soap in the bucket, then it's not possible.
Okay, all right. Maybe, if you have you ever seen a car that got washed? It doesn't look soapy afterwards. The soap washes off. Right?
Oh, wow, so let's take a DNA testing.
Okay, we don't necessarily have to go that far unless it's like a life and death situation. It's not that big of a deal. And that's also important.
It is God.
Okay, hold on. We're not up to God yet. We're up to a wet car. Okay, slow your roll here. All right? This is a few very important points came up in here, right? One, how much evidence am I looking for is going to depend on how important the question is. whether or not it rains or whether or not somebody washed my car, not that big a deal. I'm not going to drive myself crazy. Question?
How do we know miracles are true?
Slow down. We're building a structure. We'll get there, right? Obviously, the whole point of this is to show you evidence that Torah is true and God exists. Hello, I'm an Orthodox rabbi. That's my position, right? I'm not hiding the ball. I'm not trying to trick you. But I'm showing you how to do that in a way that's external knowledge. It makes sense. It's rational. It's reasonable. It is based on evidence. Why is no one saying it? Okay, it's fine.
Nobody?
It's too early in the morning. You need to get your coffee injections first. It's fine.
Oh, apples wake you up. Green apples.
Apples?
Yeah, more than coffee.
All right. I'm very easily distracted. Let's try to focus. All right. I didn't take my Ritalin today. All right. So now, evidence. So what is evidence? What is it? Evidence could be understood. Evidence could be understood as information. Right? It's starting again. Let's write slowly and carefully, so nobody later asks me, "What did you write?"
What did you write?
Thank you. Evidence is information that helps us. This is so important, because I'm not sure you've ever heard of evidence described this way, but it's really, really important to understand it this way. Information that helps us distinguish amongst, that's a good word, right? Amongst possible, right, stories / theories. Okay? So, when I looked outside and I saw no clouds, that was the beginning of the process of distinguishing between my possible stories. When I then saw that no other cars were wet, further distinguishing was possible. When I then saw there was a bucket with water, I now have a rational, reasonable person not dealing with, murder cases or life and death situations or whether or not God exists, really important stuff. I have enough to say, I have confidence in my conclusion. This makes sense. Does that mean 100% it must be this and there's no possible alternatives? Of course not. Maybe somebody came, turned on your sprinkler, turned it back off, walked over with a bucket and a thing and the water and sat it there and then walked away and then sitting there with a video watching going, right? Because they're really bored and this is the thing they thought of to trick you. That's a possibility. It's not logically impossible for that to happen. Certain things are logically impossible. 1 + 1 can never equal 3. A square and a circle are not the same thing. The diagonal of a square is always going to be longer than the sides of the square. These are things that can never be changed. They're logical impossibilities to say different. But in life, there's many, many possibilities. Our question is, what does the evidence tell us is the most reasonable story? The most reasonable alternative theory. And once I have the best available theory that my mind says this makes a lot of sense, I can begin to say, I think this is true. I think this is true. This makes sense that it's true. And what if you get even more evidence and more evidence and more evidence that supports it? Then you can change your language from I think it's true, it seems to be true, and then you can start to say, I'm certain it's true. I'm confident it's true. And ultimately, that's what we call, I know it's true. When you say, I know something's true, that means you're saying, I'm confident and I'm certain based on the evidence that I have at hand that something is true. Question?
So it's basically like a research paper. You build it up.
Very much. Very, very much like a research paper. Right? All of life is like this. Now, the mistake we make, one of many mistakes, is that we'll say, I know something is true, despite the fact that we have never investigated it. We've never looked at alternative stories. We've never looked at the evidence. And that's not correct language. I don't know it's true. So I'm going to quickly distinguish between saying I knowledge. Right? Knowledge is a high level of confidence based upon significant evidence. Right? But if instead I say something is faith, faith is
It's not evidence.
or insignificant evidence. Faith is a high level of confidence. Faith is also a high level of confidence. High level of confidence despite, I'm going to put this in capital letters, despite insignificant amounts and or quality of evidence. And Judaism is based on knowledge and not on faith. The word emunah does not translate into faith. Emunah translates into faithfulness. It's a very, very different word. Okay? Knowledge is a high level of confidence based on significant evidence. Faith is also a high level of confidence, but it is not based on significant evidence. Let me give you a real life. This was a silly example with the car and the water. I want to give you a real life example. Let me know when you guys are done with the writing. I'm not going to erase this. I'm just going to flip it to the other side. And then, because you may want to take a look at it again. Okay? So I'm going to give you a example that happened in the real world of science. Okay? Now, I don't know what you guys believe in terms of like dinosaurs and age of the universe, and that's not really relevant to me, that you figure that stuff yourself. I'm happy to answer questions on it. But I will tell you what the discussion was in the paleontological community, those guys that were looking at ancient life. Okay? Can you write faster by any chance? I need a second. I need a larger or second whiteboard.
Leave it on the back.
I know, but she's still writing. I feel bad flipping it.
I'm ready from the beginning. Okay.
Okay.
Afterwards we can take it.
All right. I'm going to leave it here. I'm not going to erase it.
Put
Okay?
it on the back.
It's on the back. Okay.
There you go.
Let's explore. Oh, I messed up the board a bit. Okay, hold on. Okay. All right. What paleontologists, what scientists looked at the world, right, and they said, it seems to us that there was this animals back many years ago, millions of years ago, called dinosaurs. Now those dinosaurs disappeared. They became extinct. Question?
How did they know it was called dinosaurs?
They named them.
Who gave them the right
The people who first found the bones and started to look at them. Dinosaur comes from the Latin. It means terrible lizard. Right? That's what it means. They're like, these are terrible lizards. Right? Not a bad name. Better than calling them dragons or something. So they looked and they said, dinosaurs became extinct. That's clear. How do we know? Because there are no dinosaurs in the world now. But we see their bones in the ground. They used to be around. They're not around anymore. How did they become extinct? That's the question. Right? Dinosaurs are extinct. That is something we know. And now, just like that's the same as saying, my car is wet. It's something we have observed. Now, let's bring up possible theories and stories that this is real scientific history. You can look all this up and see the discussions as they happened over the past 150 years. It's all recorded. Give me a second to finish this point, then I'll be happy to take your question. Right, so one theory, possibility, narrative, etc. is...
Big Bang?
No, Big Bang has nothing to do with this. Big Bang is a completely separate part of science.
Wait, no, the meteorite that crashed
Right.
into the dinosaur.
So one theory is, right, a meteor, right, hit Earth and killed the dinosaurs. Okay? Second possibility is climate change. A lot of changes happened in the climate which led to the death of the dinosaurs. Third possibility is massive volcanoes exploding. Another possibility is, right, a super virus. A super virus killed the dinosaurs. All of these are real.
What about the novel?
The Mabul is not a scientific theory. evolution is a scientific theory, but has nothing to do with the extinction of dinosaurs. No, they died so quickly that nobody thinks that they just evolved out.
Survival of the fittest.
Yeah, same thing as evolution. That's not one of the theories that the scientists brought up. Those are interesting scientific ideas to talk about in another context, but they don't apply here. So these are the four big ones that I'm aware of. Meteor hit the Earth, the climate changed over time, and it became too hot, too cold, too wet, too dry, whatever. Big volcanoes, supervirus, different theories. So now we're like, okay, what can we do? What are they? So they looked for. What do they look for? Evidence. They look for evidence. They look to see, is there anything that we can see that would help us to distinguish from amongst these different possibilities? So one thing that they noticed when they looked at the rock layers, ice cores, different things they looked at, is they noticed that around the time the dinosaurs went extinct, there was, the sun was blocked for a long time. No, very long time. We're talking about like hundreds of years. Right, centuries. Now, what would block the sunlight for centuries? A thick layer of dust or dirt in the atmosphere could block the sun for centuries, which would lead to the death of many plants, which would then lead to the death of those animals who ate the plants, which would then lead to the death of those animals that ate the animals that ate the plants. And it made sense. They found evidence of the sun being blocked, of massive deaths of plant life, right? So of these theories, which don't make as much sense anymore? Supervirus doesn't make as much sense anymore. What else?
Massive volcano.
Now, massive volcanoes could put a dust cloud in the atmosphere. We actually have that. You know, in the 1800s, there was a huge volcano in the Pacific near the Philippines that exploded. It's called Krakatoa. And for an entire year, there was no summer next year. It was literally 1 year of winter in like 1813 or something like that. It's like well known. You can look it up. It's really, and they didn't know why at first. Like people living in the United States were like, why was there no summer this year? It was a year with literally no summer. It was a 1 year winter. It was terrible. And then they found out that just the year prior, there had been a massive volcanic explosion in the Pacific. So they're like, oh, it threw up so much dust and dirt into the air, it blocked enough sunlight to make parts of the world not have summer. So imagine even many volcanoes, like hundreds or thousands of volcanoes doing that. That could do that. Also, a meteor hitting the Earth could also do that. What about just stam climate change? Would that block the sun from hitting the Earth? Probably not. So we already have one piece of evidence that has enormously helped us to distinguish amongst the possibilities. So now we look for more evidence. So another piece, right? So this is, I'm going to call this EVI, evidence 1. Now we're going to do EV2, evidence 2. Another piece of evidence they found is, hey, if you look at the rock layer around the time when the dinosaurs went extinct, you find that there's this element called iridium, which is very, very high amounts of iridium. Now, why is that interesting? Because in Earth's crust, there is very small amounts of iridium, not what you would expect. But in asteroids and meteors, there is a lot of iridium. Does this help us to distinguish between the possibilities?
It gives us evidence, but it doesn't help.
Of course it helps. It's the whole point of evidence. That is what evidence is. Evidence is information that... No. This evidence could support both of these theories. This evidence would tend to support which one more? The meteor. But is it enough? No, because maybe the volcanoes brought up iridium from under the Earth more than... Like, we don't know how much is under there. Maybe there's more under there than we thought. So it's not enough yet. But it seems suggestive more towards one than the other. But it's not like, Mata B'Patish, the final hammer blow. Okay? Then what did they find? Scientists said, hey, if a meteor did hit the Earth, what do meteors leave in the Earth after they hit? A hole. What do we call a hole left by a rock? It's called a crater, just so you know. But that's what it is. It's a big hole in the ground. So they started searching, and they said, well, no one found a giant hole on the surface of the Earth, so if it's there, it would be under the water where we can't see it. A big crater on the surface floor of the Earth. Does that make sense?
So they took seismically.
Well, they actually looked around with like boats and submarines and whatever. And what did they discover? They discovered a massive crater off the coast of Mexico, right? EV3. Massive crater off the coast of Mexico, specifically the Yucatan Peninsula, if you want to look it up yourself. And the hole, they're like, okay, a rock big enough to make an entire species like the dinosaurs go extinct, we would expect would leave a crater somewhere between this size and this size, right? A range. And the crater fit exactly into the size range they expected. And then when they sent boats down to examine the rocks at the bottom of this crater, they had very high levels of iridium. And so where are we left now? What is the most logical and reasonable alternative of the possibilities? Meteor. And so today, most scientists say that the dinosaurs became extinct because a massive meteor hit the Earth at just the right time, with just the right material. And the reason why we didn't know about the crater is because it's underwater, but we then found a gigantic crater. It's there. You can look it up. Google Earth, whatever. You can find it if you want to see it for yourself. And so we're left with, now, are we 100% certain that this is what killed off the dinosaurs? No. Maybe the meteor hit and they survived and something else killed them later. No, we're not 100% certain. But when you weigh out evidence, this is what evidence does. Evidence tells us what is the best answer available to us. This is what knowledge is. If you go to a court case, this person is guilty, this person is innocent, let's show the evidence, let's argue back and forth. And the jury is left to try to say, which story makes more sense? The prosecutor's story? Give me 1 second, I'm sorry. The prosecutor's telling you a story. This person is guilty and here's my evidence. The defense attorney is saying, no, their story is wrong. Our story is better. They're actually innocent. And then when you look at all the evidence, you go, which story is better supported by the evidence? That's external knowledge. Right? External knowledge. When I say I know something, the more evidence you look at, now how important is it to look at the evidence? It depends on how important the topic is. If whether or not your car is wet, you don't pay that much attention. And if you're wrong, not a big consequence. But whether a person goes to jail or not, that's huge. You better pay careful attention, or death penalty. You better pay very careful attention to the evidence, right? Whether or not Hashem exists, and even if He does, whether or not the Torah that we have was given by Hashem to the Jewish people 3,350 or so years ago, is the Torah true? Is Hashem a real thing? That's kind of important, because that changes my whole life. And it did change my whole life. I went from being an atheist to a believer, from eating bacon to, not, etc., because of exactly this. I saw enough evidence that I was like, wow. It seems much more likely to me, two alternative stories. One, there is an infinite creator, created the entire universe for a purpose, created humanity, created the Jewish people, and communicated to us on Mount Sinai what we call the Ten Commandments, and then later the Torah throughout the 40 years in the desert. That's a story. That's a theory. That's a possibility. The logical mind says, okay, that's a cool story. The alternative story, the atheist story, there is no God. The universe is just a random collection of laws and things that bounced off, and we certainly have no idea how they got there. We're still investigating. Maybe one day we'll know, maybe we won't. Nothing has any particular purpose, rhyme, or reason. Everything's just an accident anyway. We evolved by all these random events to eventually become the human beings that we are in the history that we have. And none of this religious mumbo-jumbo is true, because it's all just made up mythology and stories. Those are the two theories. The atheist theory, the Jewish theory. And now I, as a thinking observer, go, let's investigate the evidence of the Torah text itself, the evidence of the universe, the evidence of how my mind works philosophically, plus morality, put it all together, put it on the scales, weigh it out, and to me, this is me, I'm telling you my own experience, right? The weight was vastly heavier on one side than the other. It makes so much more sense to me that there's a God who created the Jewish people and gave us a Torah than the alternative story. That's why I became frum. That's why I went to yeshiva. That's why I started learning. That's why I became a rabbi. I didn't grow up this way. I grew up the opposite. Question.
So you can't say you know because evidence only suggests.
That's what knowledge is. That's what knowledge is. Knowledge never means 100%. And the rabbis agree. The rabbis in the Talmud, they call this world Alma Desveka, the world where you can doubt. The only knowledge that is 100% knowledge is the one you brought up earlier, which is Nevuah. If Hashem speaks to you, you know it's Hashem speaking to you without any possibility of doubt. But you can't prove that to me that Hashem spoke to you. That's only from my own knowledge. Now, we used to have Nevi'im and we had to listen to them. That's a whole thing because the Torah gives us a way to test the Navi, whether he's legitimate, and then we should follow him. But we haven't had that in 2,500 years anyway, so it's not relevant to us living here today. What is relevant to us is those Nevi'im, including the most important Navi of all, Moshe Rabbeinu, gave us a Mesorah, and they gave us a text, the Torah. So if we want to have a confidence and certainty, therefore knowledge, I know the Torah is true, then you need to think. If you grow up since being a young child in the religious world, and it's like, yeah, this makes sense, because why? Because that's the way I grew up. But I've never thought about it ever on my own, that's dangerous. Why is it dangerous? Because the moment someone gives you a little challenge, the moment you take one course in high school or college that talks about evolution or talks about a billion light year universe or whatever, and all of a sudden you're like, my rabbi never told me this when I was 5, and therefore I'm going to eat bacon now. Like, it's so silly. It's so silly. Like, okay, slow down, Chuck. Like, why don't you think, why don't you ask questions, why don't you investigate and not throw everything out the window the moment that you have one little challenge? But you need to think at some point. I'm not asking my 7-year-old to investigate the evidence of Torah and Judaism, but my 13-year-old, my daughter who's going to listen to this, right? And my 16-year-old and my 19-year-old, I talk about this stuff all the time. They've thought it through. They asked the questions. They challenged. They looked. They read. They went to yeshiva. And they have a confidence and certainty. Many of the rabbis, and I agree with those rabbis, would say that that's your responsibility. What's the first of the Aseres HaDibros? What does it mean? No, it says, I am the Lord your God. How is that a commandment? That's just a statement. So the Rambam says, and 99% of rabbis agree, that that is the commandment to know God exists. Yedias Hashem is the first of the Aseres HaDibros, which means if you're a Jew who doesn't have enough of confidence and certainty based on evidence and thought and reason that Hashem exists and Torah is true, you are not even fulfilling the first of the Aseres HaDibros. That's nothing wrong with you. That's the way you grew up. That's the way I certainly didn't, obviously, growing up. I'm not attacking myself. We just weren't exposed to it. We just hadn't had a chance to think about it. And now you do. I have cursed you with knowledge. I'm sorry. Yes?
So what if, like, you believe on the professional feels like you have to be God, no matter what it is?
So what did I say? It is totally legitimate. I am not in the slightest attacking a person who says, I feel Hashem in my life, I know He exists, I know it's all real because I feel it, I experience it. Cool. This is not an attack on that. I'm just saying that that's really awesome, but you can't use that to prove it to anyone else.
You don't care about
I mean, in this day and age, like, where are you living that you're not able to, like, be exposed to things and think things and question things and ask?
It's not that I'm not, just like...
Certainly now that I've dropped this bomb on your head, sorry. You have no more excuses. Listen, I have had people tell me, Rabbi, I don't think you should talk to seminary girls about this topic. They've told me that. I said, why not? I said, because they didn't grow up with this. It could be challenging to them. They might make the wrong conclusions. I said, first of all, I think you're seriously insulting their intelligence and their honesty. Like, it's not, what do you mean? You mean if I do you think it's true or not? I say to this guy. I said, of course I think it's true. I said, then what are you worried about? Is there something wrong with sharing? I'm not sharing every truth, just like I don't tell my 7-year-old how babies are made, I'm not telling you every single detail possible because we're not yet on the knowledge base to discuss everything to its depth. That's obvious. That's just being a responsible educator. I think this level is for adults. You're adults. Is there anyone here who's not bas mitzvah yet? Right? You're all adults. You're all intelligent, thinking, responsible human beings to one extent or another. Obviously no one's perfect. Neither am I. But if you're here, why should you not be thinking? Think, question, learn, understand. Don't jump to conclusions, because maybe somebody will bring you an argument that's wrong, one way or the other. How do you know? By more thinking and more questioning. At some point, you'll have seen enough evidence, you'll be able to distinguish amongst enough possibilities clearly enough to have sufficient amount of confidence and clarity to say, I know the Torah is true. I know Hashem exists. I know I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. And that is wonderful. To have that level of confidence and clarity, not based on, that's the way I was taught, right? But because you thought it through on your own, you own it. You own your Judaism. You own your Torah. This is mine. I thought about it. I pushed myself. I questioned myself. And now I own it. It's in my pocket, and no one can easily challenge me. There's always possibility of challenge if someone's being open to the possibility of being wrong, our very first class. But there's a difference between that, like, I don't know, I'm anxious, I have no knowledge base at all, and now someone challenges me, now I'm really scared. Versus, I've thought it through. I've read about this. I've talked to people about this. You don't have to have done it for 25 years like I have. Even a few hours of serious thought and questioning can give you a very significant amount of confidence and stability. Your Judaism should be founded on a solid basis. As the Rambam says, the very first pillar, Leida, is to know. Without that first pillar, your Judaism is shaky. It's weak. And how are you going to give it to your kids? How are you going to transfer confidence and certainty based on air and nothing to your children? I don't want that for you. Okay. That's pretty heavy. All right, any last questions?